I did not raise my voice. I did not slam a door. I did not send a single text message that night asking why. I just stood in the parking lot of a restaurant I had never been invited to. In a suit I had pressed myself that morning, and I watched through the window as my daughter laughed with people who were not me. Then I walked back to my car, started the engine, and drove home in the dark. That was a Thursday in October. By Saturday morning, I had made exactly one phone call, and everything changed. Let me go back to the beginning, because none of this makes sense without it. My name is Howard. I am 67 years old. I spent 31 years working as a civil engineer for a firm outside of Columbus, Ohio. I was not a wealthy man by any dramatic measure, but I was careful. I saved. I paid off my own house in full by the time I was 53. I drove the same truck for 11 years. I brought my lunch to work in a brown paper bag 5 days a week for most of my career. My wife, Patricia, passed away 8 years ago from a long illness that took everything we had saved together, and then some. After she was gone, I rebuilt slowly, quietly, the way I had always done everything. My daughter's name is Renee. She is 38 years old. She married a man named Derek 6 years ago at a venue I paid for in full $22,000 because Renee said she had always dreamed of that particular vineyard. And I loved my daughter, and I wanted her to have what she dreamed of. Derek works in sales. What he sells changes every few years. When I first met him, he was selling software. Then he was selling insurance. Then he was in real estate, briefly. Now he described himself as an entrepreneur, which, as far as I could tell, meant he spent a great deal of time on his phone and very little time producing anything I could see or measure. They have one son, my grandson, Marcus. He is 5 years old and has his grandmother's eyes and her way of tilting his head when he is thinking about something. I love that boy more than I have words for. When Renee and Derek got married, they moved into an apartment near Westerville. Then Renee got pregnant, and they said the apartment was too small. Derek had found a house, a beautiful house, 4 bedrooms, good school district, 2-car garage. The asking price was $412,000. Derek said he had a contact, a deal, a way to make the numbers work. But they needed help with the down payment, $60,000, just to get started. I want you to understand something. I am not telling this story to make myself sound like a saint. I am telling it because the details matter. They always matter. I gave them the $60,000. I also, starting about 14 months after they moved in, began helping with the mortgage payment. Renee called me one evening and said things were tighter than expected. Derek's commission had dropped. The house payment was $2,100 a month. Could I help for just a few months? I helped for 26 months. During that time, I also paid for Renee's car note $480 a month after hers was repossessed without my knowledge. I paid 2 rounds of medical bills for Marcus when he had a string of ear infections and their insurance had lapsed. I paid for the backyard fence, the new water heater, and, one memorable weekend, the entire catering bill for a neighborhood party Derek had thrown for what he called a networking event. I was not invited to the networking event, but I paid the bill, $2,700. Derek sent me a photo of the spread by way of thank you. It was a very nice spread. Through all of this, I told myself what fathers tell themselves, that this is what you do, that family is not a transaction, that the money doesn't matter as much as the relationship, that things would stabilize, that Derek would find his footing and Renee would stop sounding exhausted every time we spoke, and that one day soon Marcus would run to the door when I knocked instead of being brought to me by a babysitter who didn't seem to know my name. I believed these things because I needed to. In September, Renee called to tell me about a party. Derek had decided they were going to celebrate their 6th wedding anniversary with a dinner. Not just dinner, an event. He had reserved a private room at Hearthstone, which was a new restaurant in downtown Columbus that had been written up in the newspaper and had a waiting list for reservations. The private room held 40 guests. Derek had a vision, Renee explained. He wanted to celebrate big. He felt like they deserved it after a hard few years. I asked when it was. October 17th, she said. I told her I would be there. I already knew what I would wear. Patricia had bought me a charcoal suit the last Christmas before she got sick, and I had worn it only once. I thought this was the right occasion. What Renee did not mention And what I did not find out until much later was that Derek had told her not to put me on the guest list. The reasoning, I would eventually learn, was that Derek felt my presence would make things awkward. I was, in his words, too much of a reminder. Of what, exactly? He did not specify to Renee clearly, though she told me later she thought he meant money. That when I was in the room, people asked questions. Where did they find such a nice venue? Who paid for the food? And Derek did not like questions that had answers he couldn't control. So Renee did not tell me I was welcome, and she did not tell me I was not welcome. She simply let me believe I was coming, and she said nothing. I found out the address myself. It was not difficult. I had seen the name of the restaurant, and I looked it up. I wrote down the address on a notepad in my kitchen the way I have always done things, with a pencil, on paper, and I circled October 17th on my calendar. I had my suit dry cleaned. I shined my shoes. I left my house at 6:15 that evening and drove 40 minutes to downtown Columbus and found a parking spot 2 blocks from Hearthstone. I walked in and told the host at the front that I was there for the Callaway anniversary party. That was Derek's last name. He looked at his screen. He looked again. He said he was sorry, but my name was not on the list for that reservation. I asked him to check again. He checked again. He was polite about it. He said the reservation was confirmed for 40 guests and that the room was already full and that he was very sorry, but he couldn't seat additional guests without authorization from the party who had booked the room. I stood at that host stand in my charcoal suit for a moment that felt much longer than it was. I could see through the glass partition into the private room. I could see my daughter at a long table, her hair done up the way she wore it for special occasions. I could see Derek at the head of the table with a drink in his hand, leaning back in his chair with the particular ease of a man who is not paid for anything around him. I thanked the host. He had done nothing wrong. I turned around and walked back out to the street. I sat in my truck for about 20 minutes. I did not cry. I am past the age of certain kinds of crying. I thought about Patricia, the way I still do when something happens that she should be here to see. I thought about the $60,000 down payment. I thought about 26 months of mortgage checks. I thought about Marcus's ear infections and the fence and the water heater and the networking party I never attended. And then I thought clearly, the way I have learned to think after 67 years of not panicking. And I drove home. I made myself a cup of coffee. I sat at my kitchen table. I opened my laptop. I had been sending the mortgage payments through an automatic bank transfer, $2,100 on the first of every month, set up as a recurring payment nearly 2 years prior. I had also set up the car note as a separate transfer, and I had, more recently, wired Derek $3,000 toward what he described as startup costs for a new business venture involving an app of some kind, the details of which had never been made entirely clear to me. I canceled the mortgage transfer. I canceled the car note transfer. I put a hold on the business wire. I did not send a text message. I did not leave a voicemail. I went to bed. My phone was quiet until Sunday morning. The first call came at 9:47 from Renee. I let it go to voicemail. She said she was just checking in, that the party had been wonderful, and she hoped I was doing well. Her voice had the slightly careful quality of someone who was not sure what they knew and what they didn't. The second call came at 11:30. Also Renee. I let it go. The call that I did pick up came at 2:18 that Sunday afternoon, and it was from Derek. His voice was different than it usually was. Usually Derek spoke to me with a kind of managed warmth, the way a man speaks to someone he needs but does not particularly respect. This time his voice was tight. He said there seemed to be an issue with the transfer. The mortgage company had sent a notice. The car payment had also not gone through. I said I was aware. There was a pause. He asked if everything was okay. Was there a problem with my account? I said my account was fine. Another pause. Longer. He said he wasn't sure he understood. I said I thought he probably did understand, and that I hoped the party had been nice, and that I needed to go. I hung up. What happened over the next 10 days I did not witness directly, but I learned about through a combination of sources, my daughter, eventually, and a woman named Carol, who was the property manager for the company that held the mortgage on Renee and Derek's house, and who called me because I was listed as a secondary contact on the account. The mortgage company sent a late notice on the 8th of the month. Derek called the bank. The bank confirmed the transfer had been canceled. Derek called me 4 more times over that week. I did not answer. On the third call, he left a voicemail. His voice was no longer tight. It was the voice of a man recalculating, and I could hear him doing it in real time, adjusting his approach, looking for the angle. He said he understood if I was upset. He said sometimes communication broke down. He said he wanted to talk about it, that he had always had a lot of respect for me, that Marcus missed me, which was probably true and which landed where he intended it to. I listened to that voicemail twice. Then I saved it and did not call back. What I did instead was call my attorney. Her name is Gloria, and she has handled my affairs since Patricia's estate was settled. I told her everything. The $60,000 down payment, the mortgage payments, the car note, the $3,000 wire transfer described as startup costs. I told her I had records of all of it because I had always kept records of everything. Bank statements, written notes, dates, amounts. I had a folder in my filing cabinet at home, going back to the beginning. Gloria listened to all of it without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Howard, you may want to hear what I found out last week," because I had already asked her, 2 weeks earlier, to look into something for me. Because here is what I had not yet told Renee. Here is what had actually started this, underneath everything else, before the party, before October 17th, before any of it. 4 months earlier, in June, I had received a piece of mail addressed to me from a financing company I had never done business with. It was a statement for a personal loan. The balance was $19,000. The loan had been opened in my name, with my social security number and a copy of one of my old pay stubs, which I had given Derek 18 months before, for an unrelated purpose involving the house refinancing process. The loan, according to the statement, had been opened 14 months ago. Payments had been made on it for the first 3 months. Then the payments had stopped. The account was in collections. I had not opened that loan. I had not signed anything for that loan. My name was on it. When I asked Renee about it, she became very quiet in a way that told me more than she said. She said she didn't know anything about it. But the quiet told me she was not completely surprised. And that quiet broke something in me in a way that the party, even the party, had not. Gloria had spent the prior 2 weeks reviewing the documents I had overnighted to her. She had also, through a contact, learned that the financing company was not the only one. There was a second account, a credit card, smaller balance, also in my name, also opened without my knowledge. She told me what we needed to do. I want to be honest about the next part, because people who hear stories like this sometimes imagine the teller felt righteous and clean throughout. I did not feel clean. I felt the way you feel when you realize that the version of your life you believed in was not entirely the one that existed. That is a particular kind of grief, and it does not have a name that I know of. Renee came to see me on a Tuesday evening about 3 weeks after the party. She sat in my living room where she had sat 1,000 times before, in the chair near the window, and she looked older than I had seen her look in a long time. She started to say something, and then she stopped. She started again. She said she had known about the first loan, not when it happened, but after. Derek had told her it was temporary, that he would pay it off before I ever found out. She said she had believed him. She said she had been believing him about a lot of things for a long time because the alternative was something she wasn't ready to face. I asked her about the second account. She said she hadn't known about that one. I believe her. I want to be clear that I believe her. We sat in that living room for almost 2 hours. There was a great deal of silence. Renee cried, not dramatically, but steadily, the way her mother used to cry. And I sat across from her, and I did not say that everything was fine, because it was not fine, and she was old enough to know the difference between comfort and truth. What I said was that I loved her, that I had always loved her, that what happened next was going to be hard, and that I was going to be beside her through it, but that I was not going to protect Derek from what he had done, because protecting Derek had been the shape of our last several years, and I was finished with the shape of that. She nodded. She didn't argue. Derek was not home that evening. He had been, according to Renee, staying with a friend more nights than not since the transfers stopped. The mortgage company had sent a formal notice. The car had been flagged. Derek's phone, Renee told me, had been ringing constantly with numbers she didn't recognize. The machinery of consequence, once set in motion, does not ask for permission. Gloria filed the fraud complaint the following Monday. The financing company, once contacted, moved quickly. These things move faster than people think when there is documentation. Derek had been careful in some ways, but not careful in the ways that mattered. The old pay stub he had used to open the account had a date on it. The application had been submitted from an IP address tied to a device registered in Derek's name. He had made 3 payments on the loan from an account he controlled before stopping, which created a clear record. The detective assigned to the case, a woman named Reyes, called me twice. She was professional and direct, and she did not need me to explain things more than once. I appreciated that. Marcus stayed with me during the week that followed. Renee asked if I could take him, and I did not hesitate. He slept in the room that had been Renee's when she was small, in a bed I had bought the week before because I had known, somehow, that I would need it. He ate cereal in my kitchen every morning and watched cartoons in the afternoon and asked me once why his daddy wasn't home, and I told him that his daddy had some things he needed to take care of, which was true, and that he was safe here with me, which was also true. On the morning of the day, the detective called to tell me the case had been forwarded to the prosecutor's office. Marcus was sitting at my kitchen table, drawing a picture of, as best I could tell, a dog driving a bus. He had Patricia's eyes and her tilted head, and her complete and total absorption in whatever she was doing. I watched him from across the table and I thought about 26 months of mortgage payments and a charcoal suit pressed for a party I was not invited to, and a loan opened in my name by a man I had sat across from at my daughter's wedding. I thought about all of it, and then I looked at Marcus drawing his dog, driving his bus, and I let it go. Not forgave, that is a different thing, and it comes on its own schedule. But let go, put down. There is a version of this story where I am angry, where anger is the point. That is not the version I am telling you. Derek was formally charged in the last week of October. Renee filed for divorce shortly after. She and Marcus moved into a small rental house about 2 miles from mine, and I helped her move, which meant carrying boxes and assembling furniture and making a great many trips to the hardware store. She cried twice during the move and I let her. And we ordered pizza that night and Marcus ate 4 slices and fell asleep on the couch before 8 o'clock. And Renee and I sat on her new porch in the October dark and talked for a long time about nothing in particular, the way we used to when she was young. I still have the charcoal suit. I had it dry cleaned a second time after everything. I will wear it to something good eventually. I am patient. I have always been patient. The mortgage on the house is being handled now through the legal process. There are complications I will not bore you with. Gloria handles them. I have learned, at 67, that the single most useful thing a man can do is find people who are good at what they do and let them do it. Marcus has a drawing on my refrigerator that he made the week he stayed with me. It is a picture of 2 people, one very large and one very small, standing next to what I believe is intended to be my truck, though it has an unusual number of wheels. Above it, in the large and careful letters of a 5-year-old who has just learned to write, it says, "Grandpa." I have not taken it down. I do not plan to. People ask me sometimes, and I suppose you are asking me now, in your own way, by listening, whether I regret any of it. The $60,000. The mortgage payments. The years of transfers and bills and money sent into a house where I was apparently more useful as a source of funds than as a father. I think about that carefully before I answer, because I owe it that much. What I regret is that I confused providing with being loved, that I let the checks stand in for presents, and I told myself they were the same thing, that I allowed a man to use my name and my trust because it was easier than asking the hard questions that would have made everyone uncomfortable at family dinners. What I do not regret is my daughter. I do not regret Marcus. I do not regret the suit, or the drive, or standing in that parking lot and seeing clearly, finally, what I was seeing. Clarity is not comfortable, but it is, in the end, the only thing worth having. I did not argue. I did not beg. I drove home, made a cup of coffee, opened my laptop, and I took back what was mine, not the money, which is just money, but my name, my standing, my right to be counted. That is the story. It is not a perfect story, but it is true. and it is mine, and I have earned the right to tell it. If something here felt familiar to you, if you recognize something in this that you have been trying to name for a long time, then I am glad you stayed until the end. You deserved to hear it.